So this is the first video in my top 15 series, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 15 favorite MCU movies. Now there's been a lot of them, so there's quite a bit to choose from, and looking at this I noticed that there's a lot of these movies that I don't particularly care for that much. So there's a lot of movies on this list that I don't even really like that much, honestly. Start off with number 15, which is Thor: The Dark World. This isn't... I know a lot of people didn't like this movie, but I don't remember much of it. I've only seen it once in theaters, but I had a good time watching it. I saw it with some friends. We had the movie theater was completely empty besides us. It was the first time I had been in an empty theater. It was cool. So I guess it's just a good experience is enough to put it on my list, honestly. And number 14 is Spider-Man: Homecoming. And yeah, it's a good movie, but it's so low on my list just because there's 2 or 3 Spider-Man movies that I can think of that I enjoy more than this. You know, I still prefer the Raimi films over this, and it just doesn't do. I don't know. I don't think it's the ideal Spider-Man movie like some people might say it is. Number 13 is Captain America: Winter Soldier, and this movie it just didn't sit with me. Didn't have a lasting impact on me as it might have had with some other people. It's good, but the Captain America character has never really interested me. The Shield and Hydra stuff didn't do much for me, so it's kind of lower on my list. Number 12 is the Avengers, the first Avengers. And this is somewhat lower on my list simply because I don't think it's aged as well as other people might. A lot of people hold it up on this pedestal as being, like one of the greatest superhero movies, and I don't see that. It hasn't aged as well, in my opinion. It's got too much of... it's too much a Joss Whedon movie. His specific style is kind of in there, and I don't like his style that much. And there's also some like weird thing I noticed with the color in this movie. It's like oversaturated or something. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but it just seems off. Like the colors are too bright, which is weird to say. But also it's too much quipping. The quipping is something that carries on throughout the MCU after this movie, and it reaches a tipping point with Age of Ultron, which is one of the many reasons I do not like Age of Ultron at all. But it's just too much quipping, and it goes on for too long throughout the MCU, and it bothers me. But number 11 is the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and this was bumped down on my list a lot, just simply because I prefer the first Guardians movie over. I mean, I prefer the second Guardians movie over the first one. I mean, it's a good introduction to these characters, a nice way to bring us into this world, this side of the. I mean, bring us into this side of the world in particular, the more cosmic space side of it. But yeah, number 10 is Thor, the first Thor movie, and I think this movie has aged better than some of the other early entries in the MCU. Aged better than Captain America: The First Avenger, or The Incredible Hulk, or Iron Man 2 especially. But it's a well-made movie. I think the score is very underrated. Kenneth Branagh does a good job as directing. But it's just, it kind of feels obligatory, like they had to make a Thor movie because we need him in Avengers, and we can't just drop Thor in without explaining where the heck he comes from. And so it kind of seems like they didn't really want a Thor movie, but they had to make one, so it kind of shows in the movie, I think. Number 9 is Captain America: Civil War. And this is going to be kind of similar to the next movie on my list, because it really just doesn't do much for me. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of substance to it. I mean, I'll admit it's a good it's a good development for the characters of Iron Man and Captain America. It's a good, it furthers the plot of the world in its entirety along much more better than it did in Age of Ultron. It's just the whole movie kind of seems centered around this one fight scene at an airport that everybody's praising, and I just kind of needed more from this than just a cool fight scene, to be honest. So that's why it's kind of lower on my list. But it's still, I say lower on my list. 9 is still a good place to put it, honestly. Number 8 is Avengers: Infinity War. Very recently come out. It's still, this could always move around, but for me, it feels more of just an event movie than an actual movie. It's kind of, if you look at it just as a movie, it's kind of a mess. It's long. I don't see distinguishable first and third and second acts, and it just jumps around. Characters disappear for 30 minutes. You don't see them. You forget about them, and then you're kind of wondering, well, where did so and so go? And then they'll pop up, and then they'll disappear for another 30 minutes until the big final battle. And it all kind of just seems again centered around all these cool big epic battle scenes, which don't do much for me. I need more character-driven stuff, and there wasn't a lot of character development for all these characters except Thanos, who we only really just met, and we're not caring too much about him, to be honest. So that's why it's kind of lower on my list. Number 7 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, I didn't like this as much as I liked the first Ant-Man movie. It's just simply because this Ant-Man and Wasp feels like it's falling in line with the other MCU movies, which is kind of, I felt like the first Ant-Man steered away from the MCU tropes a little bit more. That's why I like it a little bit more than the sequel, to be honest. So it's just, the second Ant-Man just doesn't live up to the sequel as much as it does. I still like that character very much. It was nice to see more of the Wasp. I thought Ghost was a very interesting character to introduce. Number 6 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This is just building on what I liked about the first Guardians and fixing what I maybe didn't like about the first Guardians. Style-wise, it feels kind of different. The first one honestly felt like it could have been more of a Star Wars movie, and this kind of steered away from that a little, embracing its comedy a little bit more. Some people could say it's too much comedy, but I don't think that really bothered me. Again, it just felt like it felt more real in a sense. Like we're opening up this world and looking in at these characters at this particular moment, and it's not too connected to everything else. You don't need to throw in a pointless Thanos cameo in the middle of the movie and stuff like that and start talking about Infinity Stones and whatever. So number 5 is the first Iron Man movie. Again, I just really enjoy a good origin story, and I've always liked Iron Man's origin story in the comics, so this felt good and similar enough to the sort of superhero movies we've been getting in the early 2000s, but still different enough to kind of change the game a little bit and shake things up in a good way, setting us down this path. The fourth movie on my list is Doctor Strange. And this is kind of high on my list, I'll admit. I'll say I enjoyed the introduction of Doctor Strange. Like, yeah, he's a little similar to Iron Man. I'll admit that, but the big thing for me in this movie was when we look at all the other previous MCU movies and even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they've always been kind of shying away from magic. Like, oh, it's not magic. It's just science we don't really understand yet. I thought that was stupid. And it's nice that in this movie they're going full on magic, LSD trips, multiple universes. It's cool to see them kind of break that open and say like, yes, magic, here you go. We're not cutting any corners or anything like that. So I liked that. I liked it for that. Number 3 is Iron Man 3. And this is going to be a lot higher than, like considerably higher than a lot of other people's lists. But the reason I like this movie, it really felt standalone. It was a good look at this character and what he's dealing with, especially after the events of the first Avengers movie. It felt very different, very standalone, and I feel a lot of the reasons people don't like this movie are probably going to be reasons that I do like this movie. So it's kind of the inverse effect there. Number 2 is Thor Ragnarok. This is a movie I like a lot. I think it's the funniest of the MCU movies. I really like seeing how they kind of reinvented this character into a character that, took a character that I kind of liked, my second least favorite Avenger, and, turned Thor into a very funny character, a very likable character they did good stuff with Loki. Some of these newer characters they introduced, like Valkyrie, was very good. Korg was hilarious. It's a very funny movie, very fun. It seems like the perfect balance for me, personally, of all the things they've been trying to do in the MCU. Action and comedy balancing out perfect with these other elements too. And number 1, I mentioned it earlier, my favorite MCU movie is going to be Ant-Man. And simply because, yes, it still has these MCU tropes, but in my opinion, more than any other MCU movies, it feels more grounded. It's almost similar to the Netflix shows in a way, where, he's more relatable, he's more understandable, and it also really felt like those early 2000s superhero movies that we were getting. That those are the superhero movies I grew up with. Your Spider-Man, your X-Men, the first Batman Begins. Just these. I would even fit the first Iron Man in there. When it just feels like a more grounded human story than some of these other ones. You can't relate. You can't really relate to some of these other characters too much, and I feel like you can in Ant-Man a little bit more, and that's why it's my favorite of the MCU movies. And so that's my list for my 15 favorite MCU movies. I hope you liked it. If you did, you could. You know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. I feel like that's the first time that might be one of the first times I've ever asked you to do that in my videos. I'm not really sure how I'm going to end this, so I'm just kind of talking. And I will see you guys next time.